Here we're back with lecture 4 for chapter 4, and this time we're going to be talking about first of all reviewing efficiency, and then talking about when markets are not efficient, when we have inefficiency. Again, efficiency, we have two types. We have production efficiency, which means we're producing at the lowest possible cost, not wasting resources. We're not going to talk about that right in this lecture. We'll talk more about that when we talk about production cost, competition, monopoly. The one we're going to talk about today is going to be allocative efficiency, and that's producing the goods and services people value the most. And the condition is producing where marginal utility equals marginal cost. That will guarantee that we're producing what's known as the optimal amount. And by producing the optimal amount, we're going to maximize our total surplus. And so down here, we have an example. We have supply upward sloping, and supply again represents the cost to society of manufacturing this good. And then the downward sloping is demand, which measures the benefit utility that we get from production. And optimization is right here. That is where the marginal utility is equal to the marginal cost. It's also happens to be where our quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, which is good. So it means that equilibrium is the same as optimal. Not always the case. One of the problems we have later on in the course is where equilibrium is either more or less than the optimal. If all things work well and the markets don't have certain problems that we'll summarize later on in this lecture, then the equilibrium would be the optimal. So these two conditions are different. This is for equilibrium. And that gets rid of any surplus or shortage. And this is the optimal position. And that means we maximize our social surplus. And so again, this is our benefits, our utility up here, and this is the cost. And so we want to produce everything that has this condition where the marginal cost is less than the marginal utility. And that is anywhere up to the equilibrium optimal point. So all this right over here on the left side is where the marginal cost is lower than the marginal benefit. This is where we get our surplus. So all this, we will maximize our surplus. All this. The bottom part, remember, we don't keep that. That's the cost of our resources to produce the equilibrium or optimal amount. The net gain to society is a surplus. And again, this is split between the consumers and the producers. So the top part is the consumer surplus. I use CS for that. And the bottom part is the producer surplus. And it's been maximized. Now, the problem we get is when that doesn't happen. There's two ways to have efficiency loss in a market, and that's where you're producing to the left of the optimal or to the right. And so we have what's known as allocative inefficiency. And we're not producing where the marginal utility equals marginal cost. If society does not produce where marginal utility equals marginal cost, then we have an efficiency loss. In economics, this efficiency loss is called a deadweight loss. A deadweight loss is a loss in total surplus. And there's two ways to get a deadweight loss. The first way is to produce at a position where marginal utility is greater than marginal cost. The problem there is that we stop short. We're not producing all the items which have this condition. We produce some maybe, but not all of them. And the goal of our maximization of total surplus is to produce all goods that do this, that have this condition. This means we're not producing some items that would give society more value utility than the cost of producing them. We're producing less than the optimal. So go back to the graph. That'd be if we're over here, say. Let's call this output Q1, where Q1 is less than the optimal. The optimal is right here, and we're here, we're less. The problem with that is that we're not going to get all the surplus. The problem is that we're going to have a deadweight loss, and the deadweight loss is right here. This represents surplus that we're not getting. Why? Because we're not producing the optimal, we're producing less. Remember, this is our utility, our benefit. and this is the cost. So this production right here should be done. It's actually beneficial to society. It brings in this additional surplus. And the more left we go, the more the deadweight loss is going to grow. Deadweight loss comes from both the consumer surplus usually and the producer surplus. So combined together, those two triangles from the consumer surplus and producer surplus, both together are your deadweight loss. What that means is that more resources should be brought into these markets because we are producing less than the optimal. The other problem we're going to find out is when we go too far, we're producing too much. We're producing some items that cost more to produce than the value society places on them, and that's doing this. We don't want to do that. That's a waste. We're taking resources that have a higher cost than the value we create from those resources, from the utility we get from the products that are produced. We produce more than the optimal. And that'll be over here. And say we call this output Q2. I'll squeeze it in, Q2. And that means we're over here, we went too far. Now we're producing beyond the optimal. And this is all bad production. It's bad because the cost now is above the utility. Utility now is down here, cost up, complete waste. We're essentially producing a lot of stuff that costs way too much more than the benefit. All this loss here is also a deadweight loss. It's a loss of total surplus because we're throwing some of our surplus away. Yes, we maximize it over here, but now we're giving some back. It's like, for example, let's say you maximize income this month. You worked as many hours as you could. You maximize your income, and then you've left your wallet at the restaurant full of cash, and it gets stolen. You've thrown some away. So essentially, you've gone backwards by going too far in terms of production, and that means that our resources should be redirected out of these markets into other markets. And what's nice is that typically markets are pretty good at doing that. So for example, if we were down here at Q1, that would mean the price is down here, and we would have a shortage with the quantity supply being there and the quantity demand to be there. Well, what's nice about that is that the market will raise the price and will move toward the optimal. If we're over here, what that means, if looking at a market by itself, price is too high, it's up here, and we have a quantity supplied way above quantity demanded, and that'll be a surplus, and the price will come down. So markets are good at regulating away from these losses itself. And so markets tend to do a pretty good job, provided it meets certain characteristics. So when are markets not doing a very good job? Well, sometimes the problem is caused by government. Sometimes it's caused by the markets themselves. Government can mess up markets in many different ways, but the three most common ways is through trade protection, which we talked about already, where it reduces free trade, which takes away net gains from everyone. We have price controls, which we'll talk about later on in this chapter. That'll be the next lecture. And price controls can either cause you to produce too much or too little. And then we can have taxes. Taxes has the benefit that it brings in money to the government that they could do things that the private sector would not do, but there is going to be an efficiency loss with taxes. And then markets can fail on their own, and economists call that market failure. So market failure means it's not government, it's the markets themselves. And four main ways markets can fail themselves, and much of the course is centered around these four things. First of all, we can have imperfect competition. That'll be price-making power. That changes how the markets work. We no longer go to the optimal. The markets, the buyers or sellers is going to move the output one way or the other. And that'll be things like monopolies, oligopolies, and so forth. We can also have a problem with asymmetric information, which means we don't have the same information for everyone. And that gives some people an unfair advantage. A very common problem there is when you buy a home, the seller knows more about the home than the buyer. And therefore, the buyer may not be making the best choice possible. Of course, that's why we have laws about full disclosure and things like that. Then we have something you probably never heard about, but is a main issue in markets and economics and government and the legal area, and that is externalities. These are third-party effects. This can cause us to underproduce and overproduce away from the optimal. And the last one is public goods. These are rare in the sense of being a pure public good, but the problem here is that if you don't pay for it, you still can get the benefits for it. And this creates a problem. If you can get something for nothing, then you won't pay for it, and therefore the markets won't produce it. And we have chapters that are going to deal with all these issues later on. And I'll stop there.